Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me in the room. I can hardly see all of you. It's very dark. Okay. Anyway, yes, I'm Kat Swetel. I'm actually working at Nubank currently, not consulting. I'm the director of engineering for basically infrastructure stuff. So if you ever want to talk about infrastructure stuff, I guess I'm your gal. Um, Yes, and today I'm going to be doing a little bit of an introduction to Wardley mapping. I believe that Simon Wardley was originally supposed to give everyone this introduction, but he's obviously not here. I am instead. Because I didn't know if I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so I'm coming to you live from Phoenix, Arizona. And because I didn't know if this talk would be pre-recorded or whatever the deal is, I tried to put a lot of like links and additional resources and stuff like that here on this mural board. And if you visit the mural board, pay attention because there's also, I put comments on certain things as well, just in case I wouldn't be here to explain it. So after I gave the talk in Brisbane, I added some more stuff. So yes, hello, welcome. If there's any low vision folks in the audience, I'll just describe myself really quickly. I'm a white lady. I have like shaggy brown hair, black shirt, purple vest. There's a drum set in my background. I don't play drums. And then there's a whiteboard in my background as well. And with that, I guess we can get going. Yeah? Okay, whoops. Okay, so first things first. Who here in this lovely audience has heard of Wardley mapping? So what we're going to do here, we're going to, when I say go, you'll hold up like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers to indicate kind of where you are. And that way we can all look around the audience and see like if you're a total beginner and you're looking for an expert, or you're somewhere in the middle and you're looking for someone else to explore with, we can kind of figure that out. So one would be, I've never heard of Wardley Maps. Two, I've heard of them. I don't really know what they are. Three, I have heard of them. I know what they are, never made one. Four, I've made a map. And five, I've done kind of the whole Wardley mapping process, like made a map, used doctrine, all of these different things. So on the count of three, let's all in the lovely audience hold up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. All right, and take a second to look around so you can find a buddy if you need to out there in the audience. Cool. Okay. I can't really see because it is dark, but it did look like there were a lot of ones. So welcome, newcomers. First thing, if we're going to talk about mapping and what kind of strategy we do with mapping, we need to know what the heck is a map, right? What separates a map from a diagram or a chart or whatever other types of visualizations that we do? So a map has three things that make it a map. It has an anchor that helps you orient on the map. It has position, and that position is meaningful. So two things are close together, we expect that to mean something. If they're far apart, we expect that to mean something. And it has the idea of movement on on the map. I feel like those things are pretty abstract. So let's go through some examples of different visualizations. This one, if anyone is familiar with the game Rock, Paper, Scissors, Lizard, Spock, I first learned of it from The Big Bang Theory, the TV show The Big Bang Theory. Yes. So let's see. Is this a map? What do we think? Does it have an anchor? I don't really know if any of these things would count as an anchor, right? I think we could like kind of turn this on its head and it would mean essentially the same thing. What about position? Does it matter if I move scissors up here? Does that change scissors' relationship with paper or with Spock? Does it matter if I put lizard over here? Does it change its relationship with Spock or paper? Not really. right? Like it looks pretty when I put them together like this, but it doesn't really change the meaning. Moving lizard far away doesn't mean that it takes like a longer amount of time to poison Spock or anything like that. So position, not super meaningful here. Movement, I think, I don't know. I think you could go either way on this one. But it definitely has more movement than it does position, right? So I think that this essentially fails our test for being a map, although it is a fun game. What about this? This is a systems diagram. I included a link to a video if you're like not familiar with the notation or whatever, not that you really need to be. I think we can kind of grasp what's going on here. If you don't brush your teeth, then you will have bad breath. And if you come in close contact with someone, you might have shame, which would then cause you to brush your teeth. And there's another loop here. If you don't brush your teeth, you could get cavities. And that might also bring you shame or some sort of discomfort, and you might brush your teeth. So is there an anchor on here? I don't know. You might argue, maybe. I don't think there really is, right? I think you probably could start at any of these places. I'm not sure that there's an anchor. What about position? Is it meaningful? Somewhat more than it was in rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. This cavities is farther out here, meaning that it's a longer feedback loop. But also we could kind of like change all of these positions like that, and it wouldn't really change the meaning. So a little bit weird in that way, I suppose. And movement, there is this idea of a flow and movement and time. So I think it has that. I think where it lacks the anchor, it would be hard to make an argument for one of those being an anchor. And position, like the distance is meaningful, but the rest of the orientation, because there's not an anchor, is not really. So I think this one also does not pass the test. And here we are, we've arrived at an actual Wardley map. So I'm hoping this one passed the test. This is a map of the Klingon tea ceremony. Don't know if anyone is a really big fan of the Klingon tea ceremony. But the way that we read this is as a chain, basically, of dependencies that fulfill a need. So up here we have Worf, and he wants to share a special moment with his friend, who's also his doctor. So that's a little weird, but anyway, he wants to share this special moment. She said she wants to have this tea. Okay, so what do we need? We need the friend, the doctor. We need a cup of tea. In order to have a cup of tea, what do you need? You need the flowers that the tea comes from. You need this tea set. You need hot water. In order to have hot water, what do you need? You need a replicator because you're in space and hot water doesn't just like spontaneously come into being. So we have this chain of dependencies here. And let's see if it passes the test for a map. Does it have an anchor? Yes. This is your anchor here. You have this need that is Worf wanting to have a special moment with his friend. Is position meaningful? Yes, position is meaningful. Things are organized on this x-axis, which is evolution. So the things on the left are in Genesis. That means they're very poorly understood, probably like this slide. The next one over is custom. So this is where people understand there's a need and they're making these things, but you can't buy it off the shelf. Product you can buy off the shelf. And commodity is like a utility, like electricity or something that you essentially only notice when it's broken. So on the left, brand new, highly conspicuous. On the right, highly commoditized, very inconspicuous unless it's broken. So here, position is definitely meaningful. These red lines indicate evolution. So We could try to evolve the flowers that make the tea, like commoditize them. But there could be some resistance. So we have this kind of blocker here. The flowers are pretty hard to come by now. So it might be hard to get them and make them into a commodity. They're also poisonous and might meet some resistance from whoever like turns it into a replicator recipe. I don't really know how that works in Star Trek, but whatever. There would be some kind of resistance there. Okay, and that is the idea of movement, like the evolution. There is movement here. There's lots of different flows depicted in this map. So I guess it is a map, and there you go. For those of you that were a one at the beginning, I hope you at least have some idea now of what a map is. The first question that people always ask me after I show the first map is how do you know where in which of these four categories or where on the x-axis to put each of these things? Good news, everybody. Everything kind of in the Wardley mapping body of knowledge is available under Creative Commons. And so there's this handy dandy sheet here that has the categories, and you can find a pretty accessible version with like descriptions and things like that at this URL, learnwardleymapping.com/landscape. That is definitely the site that I recommend as far as accessible materials. But you can just pick one of those things like, I'm thinking about the flowers that you make the tea out of. Okay, they're pretty rare. How are they understood? I don't know. His friend found out about them, so I guess word's getting out. And you can just go through and kind of do that and pick a spot on the map. Where this gets interesting, so I do think that like it's really interesting to go through this exercise of taking the value chain and plopping things somewhere along the x-axis, even if you don't have like a fully fleshed out map. Why is that? For me, some of the big value that I get from Wardley mapping is in asking these two questions. So how do I treat this component? Do I treat it like it's commoditized? Do I treat it like it's custom? And how does the rest of the industry treat this component? And really, like these two questions are indicative of, I think, the value proposition of Wardley Maps overall, which is that puts your value chain, your value network in a broader context. But I think the component for probably most of us in the room that illustrates how we can have very different answers to these two questions right now is compute. So how do I treat this component? Well, do you treat it? Are you lovingly crafting your own data center that you manage yourself, or are you going to the cloud? If you're going to the cloud, you're treating it as a commodity, you're treating compute as a commodity. And if you pay for space in a managed data center, someone else manages it, then maybe you're treating it as a product. If you have your own data center and you have your own whatever, then maybe you're treating it as custom. But then we can start to ask, like, why are we treating this component in this way versus the rest of the industry or the majority of the industry treating it in this way? And what sort of advantage do we get? So if you're going to do nothing else, maybe at least check out this view of the landscape to help you think about the components that you have within your ecosystem and kind of how they are positioned versus the rest of the industry or the broader context. Okay, so this brings me to kind of the big point about Wardley mapping. There are so many tools out there to help you think internally, right? There are tons of amazing tools. Yeah, there's value stream mapping, there's this that I have up here, the business model canvas. There's lean startup, which is kind of linked with the business model canvas. There's all of these things, but I think it's very powerful that Wardley mapping puts you and your value chain in a broader context. So something like the business model canvas asks, who will benefit from this, right? Do I have a customer? Yes, I do. Okay, wonderful, great. Wardley mapping asks like, how will this work? Is there anyone who will be resistant? So we know we have customers who will like it. Do we know that there are people or groups who will be resistant? Wardley mapping also asks, do we have the right infrastructures in place? Whereas a lot of other methods are looking at like, do we have the right expectations with our customers? And a lot of other methods looking at the delivery rather than the ongoing operation of the thing. And so I think all those other things have a lot of value, but Wardley mapping brings a different perspective, a very strategic perspective where you're putting what you're doing in a broader context. And I'll give you a couple examples of where this is important. And I'll start out with what starts as a historical example and goes into something a little bit more future forward, I guess. Has anyone here heard of Transmeta? Anyone? I don't see hands. Maybe one person. So Transmeta, like 2000, the tail end of the dot-com boom, they have been the stealth startup. They hop on the scene and say, we are going to produce this low energy chip. And it's the hottest thing since sliced bread. Everyone's pumped about it. They get a bunch of orders. Let's do this, right? And Intel sees that and is like, terrific, startup, you just validated a strategy for us. We know that it's good because you're getting orders. And so Intel comes, they're the incumbent, they already have all these resources available to them. And Transmeta like messes up some small amount, has a recall, and it's like catastrophic. Whereas Intel is able to just come in and be like, fine, we made our own low energy chip, get lost. And of course, none of you have ever heard of Transmeta, so we know how that works out. But there are a few things here, right? From the Transmeta point of view, do you have a customer? Do you have a validated value proposition? Yes, there's customers, they're paying, like life is good. We know we can produce these things. But if we were to look at that from a Wardley mapping point of view, you would look at chips and say those are pretty highly evolved. So the tolerance in the market for any kind of failure will be quite low, right? And so having a recall could be catastrophic because the more evolved something is, the less tolerance for failure there is in the market. And then also coming up against an incumbent who has all of those existing relationships, right? There's a huge force behind that, that it's not really enough to have a validated value proposition because that incumbent will be able to use their network to basically just take your validated strategy and make it their own. But now, like, it's also not enough just to have that incumbent energy because now we see that we're seeing competition again in the chip market with different architectures, Graviton and all the M's or whatever, right? So looking at the competitive landscape, the infrastructures that are in place, all of these things, I guess, and looking at the evolution of the components. And now that we've commoditized compute, does that open a door for there to be different architectures at a different rate? Probably, right? Because I don't have to go out and buy new machines in order to switch to Graviton. I just need a different image and I can go ahead and switch to Graviton instances. So the cost of switching is much lower if you are in the cloud or whatever the case may be. So just some things there to think about. The next example that I'll use is electric vehicles. Hot topic here in the United States. I don't know how it is there in Australia. But yes, let's look at electric vehicles, shall we? So if you want electric vehicles and you want them to be adopted, we're going to save the environment. Let's go, giddy up. So if you want electric vehicles to be adopted, what do you need in order to adopt and use an electric vehicle? You need to charge your electric vehicle. What do you need in order to do that? You need about 100 amps dedicated to charge an electric vehicle. So that means you either need a dedicated 100 amps or you probably need a 400 amp panel, minimum of 400 amp panel, so that you can have 100 amps for your electric vehicle and then regular 200 amps or whatever for life. I don't know. So you can add a commercial, you could get that through a commercial service, which will definitely have that, or you could get it through a home service. However, if you're going to get it through a home service, most homes, at least in the United States, are 100 or 200 amp services. So you'll need an install of that panel, on and on and on. What does this say about the adoption of electric vehicles? Can we say from that map that Tesla's position is safe in the market? Right now, they're hugely dominant for electric vehicles in the United States market. I think their market share is something like 71% or 75% right now. But is it safe? If we look based on that, we know that the majority of homes have a 100 or 200 amp panel. And we know that now the kind of new manufacturers on the scene for electric vehicles are Ford and GM. And in the United States, Ford and GM and Dodge make the majority of commercial vehicles, fleet vehicles. So is it easier for a fleet from a charging perspective? Is it easier for a fleet to adopt electric vehicles, or is it easier for someone, a consumer, in their residence? This kind of makes it a little more interesting, right? So Tesla does have this huge market dominance, but now that we have the manufacturers who manufacture fleet vehicles, probably have existing contracts and service terms and all of these things with a lot of the fleets in the United States. Now that they're manufacturing vehicles that are also cheaper, do we think that it will be easier for them to adopt electric vehicles where you can safely charge without upgrading anything each night? No one's in the building anyway. Or do we think it will be easier for consumers to adopt electric vehicles at the residence? Makes it a little bit more exciting when we frame it that way, right? But we can look at this map even more. So now I added some things on here. Like I said, you read this as dependencies, right? There's some other things that are interesting in the United States. You have to purchase this. There is an electric vehicle tax credit. However, there's restrictions on income and there's restrictions on the dollar amount, like the purchase price for the vehicle. So again, Ford, GM make typically more affordable vehicles, more accessible. So they would be eligible for the full EV tax credit, and a Tesla with pretty much anything would not, like any kind of add-ons at all, would not be eligible for that. I did put a note on here that maybe you're identifying your need here that is anchoring your map through one of those other things like the business model canvas or whatever, and then working through the map. The other thing that I think is interesting to do once I draw a map is what if I wanted the things on here to move? Or what if I wanted to make an outcome more likely? Or what if I wanted to just monitor how likely an outcome is? We can attach metrics to these things, right? So I could say, okay, I want to know if the market is shifting to make it more accessible for consumers to purchase electric vehicles. So I can monitor some things, right? Like I could monitor the number of new services added at existing residences, because that could be a sign that they're adding another 100 amp service instead of upgrading the panel, just add another service. Um, I could monitor the percentage of 400 amp services versus 200, 100 at residences and whatever other small businesses. I can monitor the number of 400 amp panels sold. Uh, and I could also look, because here at least you do have to submit a plan to whatever your local municipality or county government is. You have to submit a plan to be upgraded, right? For the health and wellness of our electrical grid, you have to submit a plan saying you're going to upgrade your panel and move from 200 to 400 amps. So we could also look at how many plans are submitted. Um, a lot of places publish those things. What can we do to make something more likely? Well, we could intervene here, right? We have these plans that some of them are kind of ready made. Sometimes it's pretty custom. So we could intervene and say, we want this to be more likely that consumers will adopt electric vehicles and charge them at their residences. So we could say, we are going to provide plans that these installers can easily customize. And, maybe we say, like, we already went over these plans with these jurisdictions or something like that, these major metropolitan areas or whatever the case may be. So that's kind of like, you have the map, and then what are you going to do with it? What actions are you going to take? So there's a lot of times when I attach some metrics to try to build that anticipatory awareness in myself and my team, and other times it is a good place to identify an intervention. So those are some things that you can actually do with Wardley Maps. And here's a bunch of things that you can do based on what you find in your map. Again, this is all available online. It's all Creative Commons. But Simon Wardley kind of came up with these different gameplays. So based on the map, based on where you are on the map, and based on what you want to do, you can look and kind of see, okay, well, if I know that this is going on, then I'll do these things. So I'm not going to get, there's obviously like a million of them on here, and I just gave you some examples. So I'm not going to go through every one of them, but I just wanted you to know that there's more than the map. So you make the map, and there are lots of other tools available for you to actually like generate a strategy. And some of these things, some of these will be pretty familiar to you. Like, I bet a lot of you have gone through the press release process, right? Where you like come up with what would be in the press release at the end and work backwards from that, all those kinds of things. Um, there are, like I said, all of these things. If Simon was here, he would tell you start with doctrine, which is like basic things that you should do, right? Like focus on customer first. And um, I think in my personal experience, I think it's more like a circle, right? So you make a little bit of a map, and then you look at different gameplays, then you go back to the map, and then you go back to the doctrine, and you can check it all out on your own time. Again, all freely available online. You can look at Simon's book that's on Medium, or you can go to learnworldlymapping.com, same resources, but it is a body of knowledge. It's not just the map. Okay. So that's the seed that I'm planting with all of you. And this is the cool thing, right? Like there are certain techniques that get their legitimacy from exclusivity, right? Like I hope there's no one from McKinsey in the audience. But I always think of McKinsey. Like you get hired from some kind of prestigious university, and then you go to whatever top secret McKinsey training or whatever the case may be, and then you march in these places and you make these reports in this very specific way that you have to learn how to do it, all of these things, and you put your blessing on it. That is legitimacy by exclusivity. There are only certain people who know that it must be good because they went to this exclusive school, they got hired by this exclusive firm. That is legitimacy by exclusivity. Wardley mapping is pretty much the complete opposite of that. Like, what makes it legitimate is that it is inclusive, right? So we can all we just went through, we haven't spent that much time together, but we all kind of got an idea of what the heck is Wardley mapping and roughly how might I use it sometimes. So that's very inclusive, right? Didn't take years and years. It took a few minutes. Everything is available online. So you can go online. You don't have to take a special course. There's not a certification. You can just go online and learn it and exchange with different people. So what gives it its legitimacy is that it's all out there and we can all come to the table quite easily together and start exchanging ideas and stories using these methods. So I think that as we transition kind of into this digital era, right? I think exclusivity is losing its hold on the world because I think in a digital ecosystem, there's not the same scarcity that there is in a physical ecosystem, right? Things gain value from being shared, from being inclusive and readily shared. So my bold prediction, right, is that we start to see a shift from some of these things that are legitimacy through exclusivity to some of these methods and ways of operating that are legitimacy through inclusivity. Also, this stock image is like ridiculous, and I just always have to find a way to use it. Now, what should we do? I think that all of you should go out and actually try to map. And you're not on your own, okay? So Miro has a template. It is this thing that you're seeing up on the screen that walks you through how to map, and nice numbered steps here, ending with you creating the value chain and then you putting that value chain on this axis of evolution. So you are certainly not on your own. The maps that I showed you here before were made with online wordleymaps.com, which is like just a little markup language that produces these maps. There's also a Visual Studio Code plugin that uses the same markup so that you can generate them and share them. So here are some tips as you go out into the world and do some mapping. The first one, maps are like everything else, right? You put it out in the world and people hand it off between them. So the first thing that I think you should do is put an expiration date on your map. Just say on there, it goes bad, not different from a gallon of milk. Put an expiration date on there. The second thing, be satisfied with the minimum viable map. Like if you draw a couple things and you got some value out of it, that's fine. You don't have to go through the whole process and you can throw that directly into the trash, which brings me to my next point. Don't be afraid to just trash all your maps, right? Like, what are you keeping them for? It's more about the process of you thinking through this thing. So trash them all, that's fine. A pattern that I think is really useful is the diverge and converge pattern. So if you are going to map some things with a friend, maybe you create separate maps and then bring them together. Notice where they're different, notice where they're the same. I think that can be super useful. The other thing is use neutral language. So a few weeks ago, I facilitated a workshop which was about using mapping to identify interventions to stop radicalization of people in online forums, which is a big problem right now. And people were writing like, I don't know, like hate mongering of all the like I don't think that the people that are putting out this content would refer to themselves as hate mongers. Like, let's try to come up with some neutral language that can help the map be a little bit more generative rather than already landing on something before you even begin. And then the last tip is just try it. I think you should just go try a map sometime today. Like, what is the worst thing that could happen? You waste 5 minutes. I think that's an okay trade-off to make. Okay, I think that's it. And I'm happy to take questions. I think we still have like 9 minutes. Is that right?
That's right. We might even have a little bit more. So
Oh,
thank you very much, Kat. So I'll open to the audience to give us some questions. I've seen everyone else do this and get some exercise.
Hey, thank you very much for your presentation. The sort of left-right x-axis, I think, makes a lot of sense. Can you go into more detail in positioning on the y-axis? And I see there's obviously like hard dependencies, put something above or below, but sort of relatively, how do you decide how invisible or visible something is?
this, I think, is a hotly debated question in the Wardley mapping community. If Simon were here, so imagine I'm like an old man in a swamp, he would say that the y-axis is less important than the x-axis. But then there's kind of the other school of thought that I think a lot of people attribute to Jay Bloom, if you're familiar with his work, which kind of combines service design with Wardley mapping, saying that there should be like lines of sight, like front stage, backstage. So you would have like in front of the curtain for your customers, behind your curtain is your employees, and then there would probably be another one like in front of this curtain is all of the employee facing tools, developer facing tools, and behind this curtain is the stuff that I do, like infrastructure that's pretty invisible to folks. But I guess I don't have a satisfying answer because the community has not landed on a satisfying answer just yet. But those are kind of two schools of thoughts. I don't know if that's helpful.
Excellent. Any more questions? Oh, there's got to be someone from the other side of the room so I can go doing a run. Thanks.
Hi. So when you start building the map and it becomes quite complicated, especially from when you have API, some WAFs and hosting, then the map becomes quite busy. Is there a recommendation or approach how a person can reduce that, or how do you approach that?
Oh my goodness. I have so many thoughts here. Yeah, I think if it becomes like where you're visually like, oh, what the heck is happening here? May or may not be a useful map anymore. And so I might be tempted to create like a series of maps. The other thing, I'm like addicted to the VS Code plugin, okay? Because I like to I have this whole like system of commenting things out so that you can reveal certain things and obscure certain things depending on the audience that you're talking to. So that's what I do a lot. I let people get the map as messy as they would like, but then comment out certain portions of the map until we kind of land on something that is useful for the audience. But again, like that's part of why I like to use these tools. Like I like the VS Code plugin because then I can use normal tools with it, like source control, and not be afraid of like messing things up or throwing this out and starting again or having a bunch of different iterations of the same map. But I think if you can't look at it and see certain patterns jumping out to you, then it's probably a bit too busy and it should be multiple maps or have some kind of layering.
Excellent. Got time for one more.
Perhaps a bit abstracted from the map, but how do you go about exploring what the value chain is? Because it's like, okay, like you just pointed out with EVs, it's like I didn't even realize that they would have to upgrade their electrical panel. How do you sort of breach through that gap and go, yeah, that's a blocker, that's a problem?
Yeah. I think this is part of why you want something, you want a tool that is legitimate through its inclusivity, right? And this is part of what gives it legitimacy, because what we want, what I think we want, is to go to the margins. Like all of us have a pretty good idea of like what the mainstream story is in constructing that map. And that's part of why I like the diverge and converge pattern, because I am intentionally looking for people who are marginalized by the current system. So yes, I might want to hear from someone who has an electric vehicle, but I would also like to hear from someone who does not have an electric vehicle and is like, I'm not getting one anytime soon. So I think that like nowhere in Wardley mapping does it say that you need to do that, but I feel like it is part of the ethos of the community that you're trying to find the people who are included in your system and also the people that are excluded, because the people that are excluded typically have, I guess, what would be referred to as epistemic privilege in this setting, where they have an idea of the ways in which the current system is broken or not serving people properly. So I think that is like a big reason to go with that diverge, converge, and to use a method like this that is relatively accessible so that you can go find anyone and sit there and they can talk to you and you can draw a map as they're talking and say, hey, does this look right to you? What is it missing? And on learnwardleymapping.com, Ben has a bunch of videos on there of where he's done exactly that. Like he talks to people that have they've never done any mapping before. They talk and he maps. And someone can look at the map, and even if they don't know all the things, they can be like, clearly that value chain is right in these ways and wrong in these ways. So I like that quick feedback loop. Yeah, but I think you just have to go out and find people that the current system is not working well for them and hear from them.